welcome back to Truevo Talks, everyone. This episode is all about implementing real, sustainable, and environmentally friendly initiatives to your organization. So I sat down with Kelli Hogan, who is the VP of Marketing at Sylvera, and Alicia, the Head of Product Marketing at Loon. We had a really great conversation around all this topic, and it's something that I really wanted to learn a little bit more about and equally bring some value around. So let's get into it. Let's run that intro music. I really appreciate you taking the time to join. First of all, Alicia, could you just go into a little bit about Loon, about your role, what is it that Loon does, and how that kind of ties in with the reason that we're doing this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi. Loon is an API-first approach to helping businesses connect to really high-quality carbon removal. And so we think it's a really incredible opportunity for payments companies, for the fintech industry to be a huge force for good. But what we find through doing lots and lots of customer research is that businesses are, not quite making the connection to how this is a growth opportunity and not something to treat as a cost center. And also, they're terrified of making mistakes. And we can have a lot of compassion and empathy for that because there's a lot of really complex and confusing terminology. There's a lot of opacity, and really, there's a lack of trust in what good sustainability initiatives look like. So on one hand, we're trying to create the best tech tooling to make it easy and effortless to create climate action with every payment, every transaction, every customer experience. But we're also trying to, we mean this sincerely, but we want to change the carbon markets. We want to change what's expected of it. We want to change the level of transparency that's required. Sorry, I just get very excited about it. So my role in all of that is I lead our product marketing team, or really more of our growth team, and to make sure that we are understanding the problems in the market and solving those specific problems for the payments and fintech industries. But I also am trying to ensure that the products that we build fit those needs, that the messaging resonates with real people and so on. So that's how I got to meet Kelli as well, just kind of through the climate world. A lot of respect for Sylvera.
Kelli, just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Sylvera.
Yeah, so hi, and thanks for having me. I'm Kelli, and Sylvera is a carbon intelligence platform. We provide in-depth and independent ratings and reports for carbon offsetting projects. So we are also trying to bring transparency to the carbon markets, specifically the voluntary carbon markets. And what we do is we help corporate sustainability teams who have a net zero strategy or a net zero pledge. We help them navigate the VCMs whenever they've done as much decarbonization as they can and they can't offset a certain amount of emissions, then they should go to carbon markets or carbon credits. This space has a lot of baggage. It's been rife with greenwashing claims as well. And so what we're trying to do through really rigorous analysis is shine a light on the projects that are doing really well, that perform and are high quality, so that investment is steered towards them and that it does provide more legitimacy to carbon credits. I look after the marketing team. What we're trying to do, there's a lot of education we have to do. So we have to help the corporate buyer understand what credits are available, our methodologies for evaluating them. So it's been really tricky. This is an area where there's not a lot of standardization around documentation and around reporting. So our team does that work for them. Then we also, the other core buyer is someone who's in a trader or an exchange, and they need to understand the quality of the credits. They want to see a price correlation with quality. Right now that doesn't really exist, but over time we hope to help influence that. So we also have a lot of messaging and activities where we're trying to engage basically financial intermediaries.
Great. I think that's a really in-depth kind of intro, really. And I think you mentioned something there about education. And from my point of view, that's probably where it sits most in my eyes. I mean, sustainability is such a hot topic at the moment in multiple different areas. And it is something that I do want to educate myself more on. And for the context of the listener, I've got a couple of questions and I don't want to direct them at either person here. So either Alicia or Kelly, I kind of want you to have a bit of a conversation around them. But I would like to know, what is greenwashing and what are some of the ways that you can identify it? Whoever wants to take the first question. Go on, Kelly, you go first.
I guess I would say it's kind of a criticism leveled at a company or organization whenever they are making some sort of sustainability pledge or announcement that clearly people find suspicious. And I think so that it's quite broad and it can take a variety of forms, but that's how I would distill it. And I think sometimes, and there are tons of examples of companies doing this who are going to tout perhaps maybe cleaning up their supply chain, but they're still like, the package is still like very heavily wrapped in plastic, like things like that. There's an obvious disconnect. And I think that's, and back to Alicia's point earlier, where companies are terrified. I think a lot of brands actually are really scared of making any sort of claim, even when they've done a lot of legitimate due diligence, because they're so afraid of the scrutiny they might face.
Just to piggyback off of that, we define greenwashing as treating sustainability as a tick box exercise, as a one-off, especially with us being like an API for carbon removal and carbon offsets. We do not want to work with businesses who are just like, okay, we're just going to work with you and call it a day. And I love that Kelly just said that they're working with businesses that have a long-term goal, like net zero or something that's, kind of more objectively trustworthy, because we find a lot of businesses bring out into their messaging these really forward-looking, aspirational messages. We're working on, actually, I was just eating some crisps yesterday, and I saw on the back of it, like, we're a B Corp, we're great, we're all this sustainable, but this isn't recyclable, we're still working on it. And like, yes, no one's like that is a good example, but it's the fear of getting kind of just torn down by the public that holds companies back from really talking about the good things they are doing.
Yeah. So how is greenwashing essentially harmful? Is it just harmful on a reputational risk point of view, or are there other elements where it could be harmful to a brand, or just an e-com brand, or just brands in general?
Well, I think if you were legitimately called out on it, then the reputation would take a hit, but then also sales probably would. And then I think the larger effect would be that then everyone else suffers from this, because people start to just doubt any sort of claim. And I think that's the real harm here. There are companies trying to do good and trying to make incremental change, but we're living in such an extreme and polarized world already that as soon as one person makes a mistake, they can sometimes become the example for everyone, unfortunately.
Yeah, agreed. Anything else to add to that, Alicia?
No, not really. I think that really sums it up.
Yeah, I think she did a really good job of summing that up, to be honest. So moving on to the kind of the e-commerce side, where we know that Truevo involved heavily in, and even from a financial technology point of view, I mean, how can e-commerce businesses implement sustainable change or environmentally friendly initiatives to their organizations? And if you've got a couple of examples, go into those for me. Give a little bit of detail around that for the listener, and equally myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I get really excited about because kind of historically and very much today, most businesses are thinking about sustainability as a nice to have, as a cost center, as something that maybe is only going to save them from reputational risk. But actually, it is a really exciting opportunity for businesses to innovate, differentiate, and protect their long-term growth. There is so much evidence of consumer demand, especially for e-commerce businesses. I've got a whole kind of report on Loon's blog. We talk about it a lot, from Forbes and Harvard Business Review and all these different studies that show not only are today's consumers, especially younger generations that are usually going to be incremental audiences to e-commerce businesses, or a target audience to e-commerce businesses, are staying loyal to businesses that are visibly sustainable or climate positive. We did our own research and surveyed a cohort of consumers across European countries, and found that 3 out of 4 consumers said that they would they look for and stay loyal to visibly climate-friendly businesses. So think about if you are, a retailer, maybe a small to medium-sized business, and you're trying to stand out from the crowd, you're trying to grow your sales year over year and protect your long-term interests as a business, to not do something like this is actually a risk to your business. This is a huge opportunity right now, in addition to the obvious urgency of needing every business to play their role in fighting climate change, which we needed 20 years ago. So what are some ways that businesses can do this? Like Kelli mentioned, there are a lot of great great medium-term goals, like going for net zero. And kind of doing some research about what your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions look like. You can partner with a company like us to understand what that is and kind of understand the emissions being generated by your value chain. There's kind of a few different steps for building a sustainability strategy. There's lots and lots of resources out there, but ultimately I think it comes down to finding a partner who can help guide you through those different phases as they make sense for your business, and ultimately bringing that value that you're creating with your sustainability strategy through to your consumer experience so that you're getting the most benefit of the work that you need to do.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for that. I think that was a really good explanation. And I think, have you got anything else to add to that, Kelli, before we move on? I think there might be something that Sylvera can tie into there.
Well, it's just more, in addition, not just specific to e-commerce companies, but I think when you do that, I think the next step is making sure that you're communicating it very clearly about what this is. So I think what I find, people, especially if you're a consumer brand, if you have loyal people, they will take the time to read and actually dig into what you're doing. And you should be really transparent and honest about what exactly you're doing. Because I think whenever you are opaque or you are withholding, that's when the doubt comes. And I think you should be really straightforward too. What we're learning, it's really, really hard for certain industries. E-commerce, it also depends on what you're actually selling, to fully decarbonize. And I think what you need to do is kind of level with people and say, here's what we can do now. We are absolutely aware that because scope 3 is really difficult. That's your supply chain. It's quite difficult to influence that in the moment or for certain companies. But here's what we're doing now, and here's what that means. And then I also think when it comes to the savings, this goes into being transparent and communicating well. It's making that data accessible. So you'll often hear well, we've just saved X tons of carbon, and no one knows what that means really. Or I love the small products. I have no affiliation with them. They are a subscription detergent, laundry products. And if you log into their dashboard, you'll basically see how many washes you've saved, how many, they have data points around chemicals, water saved, and that's great. And then you can click to the individual level based off of my purchasing. So it makes it very personal. I think that's also really important. I still wish there was one extra level of so then what is this 100 liters of water equivalent to? Just because the average person is not really aware what these savings are. And then when you can put it into perspective of, that's 7 baths a year. I don't know the numbers, but it just makes it more tangible. And then people really get it. Otherwise it's still so abstract. And I think that is why just the whole discussion on climate change and these pledges has been really difficult for people to necessarily, get galvanized around.
Yeah, and I think I was watching, it was Dragon's Den. I think one of the things that I watched recently on Dragon's Den, and one of the things that I've definitely seen on this year's Dragon's Den over all of the others that I've watched, is the amount of brands that want to be sustainable. And they walk in that room, and the first person they want to have as an investor is Deborah Meaden, due to her sheer power and her opinions when it comes to being sustainable. And I think one of the things that I've seen become really quite popular in essentially the retail space, but equally just from a branding perspective, is community and communicating, like you say, talking to and being open and honest and allowing your consumers to understand your data. So from a branding perspective, How can brands shout about this? Is it something that they incorporate into their branding story? Is it something that is needs to be pushed out there, just as much as anything they want to shout about? How can they do that?
Yeah, I've actually got strong opinions on this because I've tried really hard to build, business cases around sustainability initiatives in past companies, and they, we got so much momentum behind them. We got budget assigned and it kind of bubbled up. Okay, we're going to launch this 1, 2, and 3 initiatives. And ultimately they were deprioritized and ultimately failed because they were not woven into the core fabric of the business. And that's another really good way of kind of a red flag to look out for when it comes to greenwashing. If you have a business that's going to run a one-off campaign for sustainability, bad news. So yes, this should be woven into your brand voice. It should be woven into your company values, into how you measure and reward success internally and externally. And we at Loon, with our customers, one of which just did something on Dragon's Den. Admittedly, I've been in England for 6 years and I don't know how to watch TV here.
I've never seen it. I know there's a person named Sugar on it. That's the extent of my knowledge.
You've never seen Dragon's Den? Well, I'm gonna have to send it to you. I'm gonna have to send you both a link after this, and you can watch Dragon's Den.
Okay, I was really fun. I just figured out how to watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and so I'm like, okay, that's it. That's good for the next 6 years. I'm fine. But if you could please, especially because now we've got a customer from Dragon's Den, please send it to me.
Yes, I will. Definitely. I'll definitely send that your way.
Yeah.
I suppose, did I interrupt? Have you got anything else to say on that point? Go on, you carry on.
We offer what we call go-to-market support because all of our customers are like, okay, we've chosen these really trustworthy projects. That's great. What do we do now? So we give what we call a comms pack. And it's not about saying, look how great we are because we've done this thing. It's about starting a conversation. And that's where I love this intersection between what I do in product marketing, because it's about holding space for conversation with your customers. Don't just talk about how great you are. Ask what they want. Does this align with what they're expecting? And that's a way to build trust, start getting those more customer-focused benefits before you even have to put a campaign asset together. You're starting a conversation. Surveys, panel discussions, focus groups, anything like that is a step in the right direction.
I just want to echo all of that. Plus, when it comes to brand, no matter what your business is, you have to align your action to your message. And so I think you're talking about two companies. So Alicia, you're talking about how there's this whole new cohort of companies that are emerging with sustainability at the core. So obviously, they need to be should intrinsically be woven into everything they do, from partners, from actions. You can't go have a wild team offsite if you really care, because that is just incongruous with why you exist. Yes. If you're another major brand, just like Alicia said, it can't just be an Earth Day campaign and we're going to talk about what we did this year. I think it should just be authentic to you. Think of the resources you have. I completely understand what it's like where you throw it on a team and then it becomes either burdensome or it's not actually legitimate. Then don't put the message out there because you won't get anything in return. Or what you could also do is actually let it live and manifest for a while before you promote it. Because then you should have real stories. You should have real results that you can tell. You don't have to rush to just say we did something. Let it actually come to life and take shape, and then over time you will, I know I'm speaking quite generally or vaguely, but you don't have to immediately announce to the world because you're oh shit, we're behind, because then it's probably not going to be a well-developed plan or platform or activity. So and as soon as it smacks of your standard corporate campaign, just can it and try to find something really authentic, even if it's small. I think people just appreciate that.
Yeah, and sorry, go on, Alicia. You're saying, go on, you go.
We did this kind of a campaign leading up to Earth Day where we were trying to help our businesses, and actually it was a little bit of a user research project to be what are you planning? What are you doing for Earth Day? And I had maybe 10 different hour-long workshops with some of our customers and even some prospects to be what's going on? They're what do we say? We don't know what to say. And so I felt a little bit like I was cheating, but the advice I gave is who are you talking to? And that is usually a very valuable question to ask. And everyone's oh, don't quite know. It's amazing how much we get so focused on the task to do and the job to be done that we don't quite think about the purpose of that communication and who we're actually talking to and what value means to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And I suppose the question I've got, the last question I've got, because I'm conscious of time really, is why has it taken businesses this long to really understand this and it actually impact change within their brands, and why has it taken so long, and why aren't brands further along this transition, and where do you think that kind of core driver has come from?
Again, I think it has to do with maybe the sector or the business. Maybe if you're not B2C, you might not have ever thought there'd be real pressure from your buyer, your stakeholders to make these changes. I also think realistically, it could be really expensive to buy the sustainable ingredient or whatever it is to make your product get into the hands of your consumers. So there are real economic pressures. I think that's why this entire climate crisis it's incredibly complex. There's a fascinating article in the New York Times yesterday that I highly recommend reading from Vaclav Smil, which is just anyways, I don't want to get derailed, but there's also been a concerted effort by certain industries to completely undermine all the data around climate crisis. There's a PBS documentary about big oil doing that right now. There's all these competing forces where I think there were clearly early adopters in some brands, again, where it was already just part of their core values. But it probably took a while before, if you run a business, especially a small business, you don't want to take a hit on your margins. And that's, I think that's also really difficult if you're not a big corporate.
Yeah. My only thing to add on that is you think back, 20, 30, oh God, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when, every business was having to become an online company, a digital company, and all of the doubting rhetoric around the power of social media to grow a brand. I remember personal friends being like, it's going to go away in 2 minutes, Similarly, we're in the next phase of that digital transformation. Every business now needs to become a climate company. And that's equally we're early days, and that's really unfortunate because there's no time. It needs to happen yesterday. But I think what we need is more success stories, more transparency in the carbon markets and the voluntary carbon markets where Kelli and I are both working will help to build trust and to showcase the stories of the people who have been on the ground for decades doing the work and creating climate impact. And the more that we can show brands that they play a role in elevating those stories and that it leads to tangible business growth, it's going to be very exciting. I feel like every single day I oscillate between what's the point, this is so scary, and oh my God, there's so much incredible innovation coming towards us that's happening right now. So I don't know why businesses are. I think Kelli raises a good point around the economic pressures, but I also think that the story is beginning to write itself. There's such cool data around consumer demand, so I'm excited to see what happens next.
I similarly, some days it's just what's the point? But you have to be optimistic, and it is all hands on deck. So I think the other message to companies, and it's becoming more and more evident that depending on where you are, a lot of governments are in gridlock about climate policy, especially in the US. And so there's now a very, the Biden administration is speaking directly to corporations saying, you are vital in helping us address the climate crisis. You can move potentially quicker. You have, other stakeholders that you can kind of activate because the policymakers are just not working together there. And I think that's why, regardless if you relate to the game, now's the time to get in it. And I think more people are actually open to it and receptive. And yeah, it's just about being honest that no one's going to get it right immediately, and it's going to take time, but we have to start doing things now.
Sorry. You've made a mistake of getting two very passionate climate activists on your podcast. But one last thing that I find really, really exciting is that the financial markets and financial institutions are integrating it into their fabric. So if you ever have a goal of becoming a public company, of getting acquired, the big four,
Yes.
EY, PwC, like BlackRock, the CEO of BlackRock is like, we do not invest in businesses that are not demonstrating some sort of climate credentials because it's too much risk objectively.
Absolutely. And you're going to see, I actually just asked one of our strategists to do an analysis of all the earnings calls this past week, because I want to see how often now are emissions or climate discussions coming up in those, because there is stakeholder pressure. I forget the name of the company in the States, but they called to oust the president because they didn't like the progress or the lack of progress that they had made against their emissions targets, because they're really vulnerable in the future if there becomes like a price on carbon. So that's also fascinating when you do have the major like financial intermediaries and players like invested in the space. I think there's still they are also there for the financial incentive, but you hope that there is a knock-on effect and that it still like benefits and helps us work towards our net zero goals as a whole.
Yeah, and I think it's also, like we talked about before, about branding and communication and community, and understanding that brands now have to communicate this whole sustainability and climate change piece within their brands. Otherwise, like you say, the big major stakeholders aren't going to invest. There's such a repercussion of not having that within your brand. And I think, to touch on Alicia's point about branding and understanding that you're, in the day in 2022 that it is now, brands are more media companies than they are anything else, and we have to understand that if you want to make a proper impact on your consumers and within your market, you've got to start shouting about it. You've got to understand that the buying decision almost starts on social media, and you've got to build brand around it. You've got to be able to communicate that message. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I can see you're both very, very passionate about this topic, and I'm sure we're going to have you all on again. And I really look forward to the next one. But let's just finish off with a couple of people of where everyone can find everyone. Alicia, start with you. Where can everyone find Loon, learn a little bit more about them, and equally, where can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Lune.co, Lune.co is where you can find us. We're publishing a lot of education on the carbon markets as well, so they're hopefully mainly geared towards kind of people in charge of growth for businesses, but also for consumer carbon literacy is an important focus for us as well. And I'm just, I'm online. I'm on LinkedIn.
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram.
And I'm on Twitter at Alicia Verbs if you want to say hi.
I'm on LinkedIn. I barely use Twitter. You'd be bored if you saw it. And then Sylvera is sylvera.com, Sylvera. Similarly, we are trying to churn out content to help, debunk a lot of the misperceptions about the carbon markets. That's kind of my mission, and make sure we're validating the people who are doing the good work.
We can pop all of those informations in the descriptions of wherever the listeners are listening. But both, I really, really appreciate you taking the time. So thank you very much. And I wish you all the best.
You too. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks ever so much for listening to that. It's one of those topics that I really, really want to keep bringing value around. Sustainability is such a hot topic right now, and it's something that I equally don't know enough about, and I want to keep bringing some value. So please go and show Kelli and Alicia some love on social media. Go and check out Sylvera and Loon on their websites, as they've just discussed, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Join the conversation with us. Let us know what you think to this podcast on social media in the comment sections, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whichever one you choose to listen on. Please let us know what you think. See you in the next episode.